Good afternoon. It is October 9th, and we had a frost last night, and back on October 1, we had another frost. We were able to cover all our tomatoes and a lot of our plants and basically save them from getting frostbitten. Last night it got down to about 34, which is pretty bad, but we're in a pretty well-sheltered corner here, and so we didn't really have, we weren't really exposed to any wind or any frosting. So this corner didn't do so bad yesterday, but tonight it's going to freeze and freeze hard, and there is no way I can protect this garden from a hard freeze, and so we are gleaning the garden. We're going to just go through, take all the tomatoes out, even though they're green. We're going to take all these green tomatoes, all the green tomatoes, all of them. We're going to see if there's any squash, even these little squash like this. Now this one, of course, this one rotted. I don't know why. I'm just going to walk the garden with you to show you what it looks like. But you can see I've got a ton of tomatoes in here that haven't ripened yet. They're just starting to. We can force ripen them. This vine right here is just producing mightily. We've got some heirloom tomatoes now because of the rain. We get some cracking, so these will rot before they ripen. So we will take the better ones, like this one here that has only minimal cracking. These that aren't cracked at all, we will cut those off. And this one here, which is, I think this is frostbitten from the first, where is it? You can't see it. This one here is frostbitten, I think, from the first frost that we had back 9 days ago at the beginning of the month. My cover didn't come all the way down, so I've already brought in all of my green peppers. However, I did see yesterday that there was one left right here that I missed. There's a green one right there that I missed. I've got a lot more tomatoes ripening here that need to be picked as well. I'll show you once I get them all picked, and in that tray right there, I'll show you how we ripen them. We've got some Japanese eggplants here. There's nothing wrong with picking a small fruit like this. They actually taste quite good. So we've still got a couple of small eggplants. We're out of time. It's going to freeze tonight. I've got some lettuces growing here. The green beans, we've got several clusters here of beans right here. So we can pick some green beans. We got some pretty good beans there. But then we've got some vines here that just never, this one just never produced. Never produced. This one is just starting. Like I said a couple weeks ago when I was walking through here, if you're going to plant green beans late, you're really gambling with pole beans because they take longer to achieve a crop and to be ready to harvest. And that's what happened here. We gambled, we lost. Basil down here, I can pick a couple of sprigs of basil off of here that aren't too badly bug bitten and dry them. I've had plenty of basil already. This whole area here is just being ravaged. Although I have a couple of little gem lettuces here, they're not quite ready to pick, but they're going to have to be picked. The other thing is we've got some strawberries down here that are, yeah, now there's a very ripe one right there. But green strawberries, I don't think these are going to survive. And I don't have a cover big enough to go over this to keep it from frosting up. So I think this is shot as well. We're done here, even though I would really like to give those strawberries a few more weeks to produce. Not much I can do about it. Carrots over here. These carrots are just starting to produce their roots, their root crop. I dug my finger down next to it, found a very slender carrot in there. They really need 2 to 3 more weeks before they get a good root. I was not expecting these to be ready until the end of October, but winter came hard. It came early, and so we kind of lost the battle with this as well. All right, so we're a little bit more than halfway through the gleaning process. If you look, you can see I'm leaving quite a bit of tomatoes on the vine. They're either too small, they're frostbitten. I'll show you what I mean. See this one right here? You see all the brown? I think this is frostbite. And furthermore, it's cracked. And that, trying to ripen this on a vine, mold will get into these cracks. And this will more likely rot once I bring it inside. Very likely be dismayed to discover that your final gleaning of the garden is going to be the best tomato picking you've had all season. Of all the tomatoes we've picked, I believe that this doubles our harvest. Even though we've been picking tomatoes for a good 2 months, we've just doubled our harvest, and we left a lot of tomatoes on the vine that are just not worth saving, either because of damage or size. Seriously. That was barely bigger than my fingertip. It's not worth picking. Well, alrighty, gleaning the rest of what we got. We got some really small fingerling zucchinis, a couple of small fingerling yellow squash, and some very small, these are already fingerling eggplants, but that's even smaller. And we got, I do lose one, we got a little bit more green beans than I expected. So, as I was looking at them initially, I only saw maybe half a dozen or so, and here I've got a bit over 2 dozen. So once I started digging through those vines, we had quite a bit. So at this point, we are done. We are done gleaning the garden. The only thing left to do now is to do some cleanup. I'm going to leave everything where it is to die. And once it is dead, I'm going to uproot everything, throw it in the lawn waste cart, and say bye-bye to the gardening season. So I've set up this shelf here in my garage, and you can see I've got a couple of these styrofoam trays, packing material for I don't know what. But we're going to take the tomatoes, lay them out in these trays, fill up this shelf here with all these green tomatoes, and I've got another tray style box down here that will fill as well, and we'll get all of our green tomatoes set out here. We'll throw a towel over them and leave them out here to ripen. We'll check them every few days, pick out the ones that are ripening, get rid of the ones that rot, because some will rot, and hopefully we'll be having tomatoes for some time. Alrighty, and here we are. We've got the tomatoes. You know, you don't want to just pile them in here. You kind of want to spread them out in a single layer, so you can come in here and just move them around and examine them. These, I guess it's okay if you spread them out. I ended up with a lot more tomatoes than I expected, because I've got more back there, and I've got the original box that I carried them in from the garden in over here as well. And so yeah, that's all the tomatoes. So it is several days, nearly a week after the last frost event that we had, when I gleaned out the garden. And I want to show you a couple of things. First off, we're looking at the pepper plant. Now this pepper plant is a fairly hardy plant, and you see that it's still very much undamaged by the frost, and I did find that pepper I was looking for earlier. It's right up here somewhere. Now I've lost it again. Well, there's one right there. So, what's happening now is I figure the garden is in its last throes, and we're coming up on a run of wet, warm weather, and I'm going to just see what happens during the next 10 days, because we're not expected to have any freezing or frost in the next 10 days, but a lot of rain. So for the tomatoes I've left on the vine, I expect to see a lot of splitting. That just kind of goes with the territory. But you can see right here, this yellowing that occurs on the leaves between the veins, this I believe is frostbite, and this is on my fingerling eggplant, and it's just kind of spotty, okay? The new leaves, however, seem to be okay. Doesn't seem, well, there's some right here. You see the browning right here? I believe that's frostbite damage. What happens with frostbite is that the sap inside the leaf freezes, and so it destroys the cells, and so you get something like this. This is the squash. Okay, that's a frostbitten leaf. As far as the tomatoes, some of the smaller tomatoes actually survived quite well. I've picked off most of the bad tomatoes, but you can see that some of these tomatoes that I left on the vine that were too small are starting to turn color. But I have pulled up most of my squash. One there, 2, 3. Out of 9 that were planted, 3 left. The lettuce, green beans have some kind of a blight on them as well. This may also be frostbite because it's between the veins. You see how the discoloration is between the veins? So I believe that's frostbite. You can see it a little better here, although my green beans always seem to get susceptible to some kind of, and I'm looking at a lettuce that is being chewed on by something. But here, look at this. You see the edges of this? See how it's all brown? I think that's partly because it was being chewed on by a bug, but I think that's also a sign of frostbite as well. Lettuce, what happens is the edges of the leaves, you see that light yellow edge on the leaf there? And so that leaf is, I believe, frostbitten. And I think if we come over, I've only got one red leaf lettuce left growing here. I've picked the other ones. But you'll also see the red leaf lettuce here is also very susceptible to frostbite, and you will see brown on the edges of the leaves. But this one doesn't look like it's done too badly. But again, the little gem lettuces, you see the edges of the leaves are brown, and I believe that's from frostbite. But I'm allowing them to grow because the center is still, the center is still growing new leaves. So I'm just going to leave them in here until as late as possible. It's October 20th, and I wanted to give you a quick look-see here. Remember, these were the tomatoes that we had put in here to ripen, and we've been pulling ripe tomatoes out of here. A few of them rotted. Mostly we're having trouble with the heirloom ones, but you can see there's a lot more color in there than there was before. Again, color in here, but we're pulling them out of here as quick as they ripen. And over here, look at all of these. Look at how red they are. There is absolutely no green in this one. However, back here, there is some green still. And these are larger tomatoes. They're going to take longer to ripen. But this is how you do it. This is how you ripen tomatoes after you glean them before the first frost. You just bring them into your garage, set them up a space for them, and cover them up and let them ripen. So, good morning, YouTube. It's October 31. I wasn't planning on making any more gardening videos, but I just wanted to share with you how things are going. This is basically the bitter end of the gardening season. Now, I have planted garlic here for next year, and you can see that it's beginning to sprout. The wild garlic is also sprouting. Doing a fairly decent job of it. This is how you do garlic in zone 6A. You plant it in the fall before the freeze so it can establish, and it's perfectly happy coming up like this. I will bed this down this weekend with some leaves and give it a little protection. Speaking of protection, we've had a couple of nights of freezing weather. It was 29 degrees last night, and you can see the tomato plants have died. They have died off. They're just this brown, ugly, deathly color. There are a few small tomatoes left on the vine that are really not worth picking at this point. Maybe that one should have been picked, but I have got a huge number of tomatoes already, and you can see that these tomato plants and these tomatoes in particular, you can see that tomato back there froze and is not very good anymore. The companion plants are dying as well. A couple freezing nights will do this. The last remaining squash has died. The last squash is the fruit isn't worth picking at this point. The serrano pepper also looking rather poor. Somewhere in here there was a pepper. It's probably not worth picking. I keep saying there's a pepper in here. There is a pepper right there. Yeah, he's not worth picking either. So we did get a pretty good crop of peppers, and you can see all the other tomato plants just looking terribly sickly and ill back there. Eggplants also frozen. This is a sage plant. It's a perennial. I do need to trim this back a bit to so it doesn't get too wild next year. Green beans also frozen out. So there's a bean right there. Although having been frozen 2 nights in a row, I don't know if that's worth picking or not. I've got a couple of large ones right here. Don't know what they'll turn into. There's another one. I'm going to pick those eventually. Another companion plant, the zinnias. Surprisingly, the lettuce and the salad greens are not really doing that badly. I could probably pick these lettuces and bring them inside. Now you see all the pine needles. We had a strong wind come in, shook all the pine needles off the pine tree, and there are just pine needles everywhere. So I'll probably be raking the garden before I put it to bed. The basil, again, definitely dead. The strawberries are doing okay. They're reasonably hardy for this zone. I will put leaves over them, and speaking of leaves over them, I have a rather large pile of leaves here in the garden. I'm going to collect some more because this is the bedding material that I use to spread over the I spread over the garden to bed down the garden for the season. All my neighbors are raking their leaves out to the curb. I just go down with a cart, pick up the leaves, bring them here and dump them. Bring you over here the carrots. I pulled the carrots up. I'll I got a picture. I'll see about posting a picture of the carrots. There weren't that many. There were only about 6 or 7. But then again, this was an experiment. I wasn't trying to grow a lot. Anyways, that's the end of the gardening season, and that's what a garden looks like at the end of the season. So it's November, like, 2nd or 3rd, and just wanted to give you an intermediate shot here. We've had several freezing nights. Basically, November gardening season is over. I pulled up all the all my attempts at fall planting here. Pulled up the weeds. You can see I've raked back all the pine needles away from this area here. Mowed the grass along the edge of the garden here. I don't worry too much about the pine needles inside the strawberries. Here's my green beans. I've pulled up one of the beds of lettuce and other salad greens. I'll pull up the next one later. Get rid of all these. I'll get rid of all these milk cartons, which were my drip watering system. As you can see, I've collected a lot of leaves from my neighbors, and I'm going to get some even more. This corner here, I've got the garlic back over here. You see I've got the wild garlic growing here, and I've got the cultivated garlic here, and I put a stick in the ground to mark the corner of the garlic bed, so when spring comes I don't go digging it up. I've pulled up all my squash plants. The last squash plant that was right here been pulled up. The heirloom tomato that was there. The 3 early girls that were there, and there are up. I've got 2 more tomato plants to take apart. What I'm doing is I'm cutting them down bit by bit, then putting them in the lawn waste cart behind me, and then I'll, like you see here, the ground is all torn up. I'll then get rid of the weeds that are there, and I may or may not get to that. Taking down the pole beans. Well, the shadows are getting long. It's a couple hours later, and you can see I've got the west end of the garden bedded down with leaves. That's the way we leave it, and it's going to be like that until spring when we uncover everything. This only amounts to about half the garden because I've still got a whole bunch of milk cartons that need to be picked up and recycled, but I'm using the recycling cart to go over to my neighbor's yard and rake up his leaves, and so I can't put the milk cartons back into there. And I've still got the green beans and the wattle trellis to take down, as well as pull up the lettuce here, wattle trellis, green beans. Once I get that all done, we can bed down the rest of the garden. And that's it. It's November 6th. The garden is all bedded down. No more tomatoes. No more green beans. No more squash. No more peppers. No more eggplant. Although, next year's elephant garlic is starting to sprout. And maybe a little right there. Another little garlic is starting to come up. Those will go dormant over winter, and then they will grow back. But that's how you do the garlics here in Zone 6A, is you plant them in the fall, let them establish, and then they will go dormant and come back. But yeah, there you go. Nothing but a sea of leaves. The strawberries are perennial. I made a video on how we take care of those in the spring. The herbs basically dying back. And that's it. Another gardening season has come to an end, and we start making plans for next year. Hope you enjoyed the tour, the walk along with me, and keep gardening.